Let me know when we're live.
We're live.
Oh, all right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
How's everything?
Good. Sorry for the delay. Just my computer was freezing,
Right.
so I turned it off, turn it back on.
Okay. You know, I'm having a bit of difficulty also with my computer. It's shutting. It's stalling my some files that had opened up. So anyway, hopefully I don't encounter some difficulties later on. But okay, well, enough of, or maybe it's pertinent, maybe it's relevant that we're talking about machinery and its incursion in our lives, given that about machinery and modern industry. Well, I guess if you go straight into it, you know, the title of the section that we're reading for today, we start with section 3. If I could just find the page number. We start with section 4, or is it section 5? I didn't write it down in my notes, but in any case, the subject is the subject is machinery. Forgive me, Matt, and everyone else out there on Facebook land that is following us. Believe me, I have notes and I'm ready to go. It's just that I forgot the title of the reading of this particular section. Of course, we're reading chapter 15, and chapter 15 is perhaps the longest chapter in the book, and so we're taking it in chunks. My hope is that we'll be able to do sections 3 and 4, or is it 4 and 5 today, Matt? So let's get into it. I want to begin by recalling that we didn't have time to get into a particular subject last week that is very relevant and very important as far as the theme of this particular chapter is concerned. And so I'd like to touch on that before we proceed into the remainder of the work that we're going to be doing this morning. And I'd like to do so by sharing that one of the main conclusions of this week's reading, and last week's, of course, is that culture is secondary to material conditions, right? That is, that capitalism, right, impels or compels the capitalist, right, in the pursuit of surplus value. And surplus value, of course, motivates and impels the capitalist to mechanize production, that is, to control cost, right, to switch variable cost into constant cost, and then, of course, reduce his cost and always cheapen his investment or her investment into the production of things. And so by so doing, of course, what the capitalist is doing is generating surplus labor, right? And it's within the capitalist mode that has surplus value generation as its aim, right? Machinery cheapens production costs by converting variable costs to constant ones. It standardizes labor such that technique is replaced by machinery. All humanity is thus an appendage of machinery and deadens the imagination of the worker and the intellect of the worker, and is used to protect against labor agitation. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to just say something, extract a brief quote from here so that we can get into some discussion about this, and then proceed on to a discussion of the automaton, which is something that Marx also dedicates plenty of attention to. On the automatic plan, skilled labor gets progressively superseded, Marx writes. The effect of improvements in machinery, not merely in superseding the necessity for the employment of the same quantity of adult labor as before, in order to produce a given result. But in substituting one description of human labor for another, the less skilled for the more skilled, the juvenile for the adult, the female for the male, causes a fresh disturbance in the rates of wages. The effect of substituting the self-acting mule for the common mule is to discharge the greater part of the men spinners and to retain adolescence. This is the part that's especially important here, to retain adolescents and children. But machinery not only acts as a competitor who gets the better of the workman and is constantly on point of making him superfluous, it is also a power inimical to him. And as such, capital proclaims it from the rooftops and as such makes use of it. It is the most powerful weapon for repressing strikes, those periodical revolts of the working class against the autocracy of capital. So we're getting into this discussion now, Matt, of the incursions of machinery in labor and in the labor economy to the advantage of capital, and of course to the disadvantage of labor. How do you suppose audiences ought to consider this discussion without spiraling down into a critique of machinery, a critique of technology that is ahistorical and even reactionary? What do you suppose?
Well, I mean, to me, the reactionary responses would not be the critique of the machine, but would actually be you see Marx is talking about this, so it's happening in our time, what's happening in that time will happen for all time. Right? That's the most reactionary attitude I feel associated with this chapter, with this reading, because what's happening, Marx is describing is the fact that they're quote unquote de-skilling labor, or they're turning labor into something that, like, you don't require years of being in some kind of guild or like an apprenticeship or something like that in order to just like hop right into, right? Meaning that you can get anyone to do it, meaning that the employee cannot negotiate with the employer in the same type of way they could if the skill was rarefied, right? And that's true. What we're looking at today, though, is the threat of a job not requiring a human being at all, right?
Yeah.
And that is different. That is not just quantitative. That's not just like quantitatively different. It's qualitatively different. That we're talking about a different thing altogether. And so the kind of the hangman that stands over any possible labor organization today is the threat of automation, the threat of complete automation, the threat of mechanization, the threat of machines coming in and essentially replacing workers outright, right? So that's very, very different. That's different.
Yeah.
This is like, before, this job required very one skilled guy that I had to pay a certain amount of money. Now I can get 3 people to do one job, and I'll pay all 3 of them, the total 3 of them, half of what I paid the one skilled guy. Okay, that's what Marx is describing, right? But today we're talking about like 50 jobs wiped out by like 3 machines. So that's a different proposition.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of important to know that when we describe today the threat of automation and what that means when still living in a market system, what it means to do that when you're still living under the dictate of capital, is a different thing than what Marx is describing. And the reason why that's important is because if it is what Marx is describing, it's like, well, what you're saying is that blah, 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 and that can't happen because, this has always been a feature of capitalism, and it's always been a feature of this, and it's always been a feature of that, and therefore, blah, blah, blah. And that's not what we're looking at. So I think that's the most reactionary attitude. Now, what can we gain from this is an insight of what Marx is describing in his time is even truer today, which is that the threat of advanced technology and the ever advancing technology is what makes labor organizing so difficult. It's what makes it so very difficult to organize people, because it is true. The fact of the matter is, and it was true then too, that ever and ever advanced technology made it more and more difficult for the worker to make demands of the employer.
There's in addition to these material difficulties, there is the cultural and even ideological, or there is the cultural and there are the ideological currents in society that make the possibility of connecting human beings to one another strange, right? Creating a sense of a collective identity. If it was difficult in the past, it seems to me that it's the difficulty is greater still today, on account of the increasing what I'll call mediocritization of society, right? That is compelled by the march of machinery in society, the march of technology in society, but a particular kind of march. In other words, it's a march that is done to the beat of the interest of the capitalist system, of the capitalist class, so long as machinery is architected and manipulated and utilized in the interest of surplus labor. Certainly, these secondary cultural difficulties are going to persist. My thinking is, of course, that, and then of course it's a thinking that's in keeping with the readings that I've been doing as we've been reading this book, and some other stuff, of course, that I've been reading, is that machinery / technology in and of itself is might I say, even a neutral thing, and if we are going to pursue a utopian pilgrimage, right? That is, if we're going to march on toward utopia, we need to contend with the very real impact and the very real presence and utility of machinery en route to that destination. Before I get into this next section or topic or theme within the reading, your thoughts, Matt, on the subject?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, we cannot, we can't. I mean, the solution remains the same, whether we're talking about like a water wheel, or we're talking about advanced robotics. You got to seize the means of production and make decisions collectively. I mean, the decision that whatever the technology, whatever the prevailing force of technology is, the political solution is always the same, which is that the way in which the thing that sits at the center of society and produces all the stuff that we use needs to be collectively owned and collectively, and collective decisions need to be made about the direction society is going to be organized around these things. I mean, society is really built around tools. It's really built around the tools that we do. Our lives are built around tools in many ways. I mean, like that. The pencil we have in there, and the use value of that pen right there, right, is actually shaped. It shapes your life, right, and the pressures of your life are shaped by like what you must do to buy that pen. But the actual ability and capacity of your life is shaped by the capacity of that pen, right? Capacity of these computers, right? My day is determined by the things I do in interaction with technology, and the pressures upon me are placed upon what I must do to maintain those relationships with technology. But my life is what it is because of the technology that's here. I mean, you talk about like you think about like we're born, we live, we die, right? We have hearts, we have stomachs, etc. Same is true of squirrels, right? But squirrels, the way they live doesn't change for like 30 million years, right? Except for its interaction with us. But human life's not what it was 30 years ago. The reason human life's not what it was 30 years ago is because of the ever advance of technology. So or advanced technology. That's what reshapes and reconfigures all those kinds of things. So, but again, whether we're talking about a water wheel or whether we're talking about advanced robotics, the solution remains the same. We've got to seize the means production.
Yeah. Our challenge is to see how it is that machinery / technology has been taken up in societies that pursue a utopian dream, a utopian tomorrow. I'd like to take us back from that contemplation back to the stuff of our capitalist dystopia, and state that the spiraling descent of capitalism, impelled as it is by the insatiable pursuit of surplus value and the ever looking to obtain more for less, has developed a system of packaging everything and always for less, of packaging everything and even our children and always with less, of packaging tomorrow's sixth graders with less than yesterday's sixth graders. Less than yesterday's sixth graders were packaged. Less teachers, less teaching, less reading, less art, less science, less imagination, less writing, less field trips, less excellence, and always more standards, more discipline, more computing, more uniforms and uniformity, where such combination between less and more is recipe for ever increasing levels of nothing and ever increasing mediocrity. What I'd like to do, just to kind of, put this in context, is I'd like to share something, and I'd like to dedicate this to, something that some thoughts that I put together on the basis of this reading. I'd like to share this with any educator that might be tuning in this morning. I know that we have some educators out there. I've received messages and texts and DMs from them, so I really appreciate knowing that there's some educators out there. And then, of course, I'd also like to share this with people who see themselves as socializing young people, be they parents, be they friends of people with young children, etc., whoever it might be, who sees himself or who sees herself in some kind of relationship with young people, with a vision, of course, the person who sees herself or the person who sees himself in that relationship, with some vision about that child's or those children's tomorrow. As technology in capitalist commodity production reduces variable costs to capital, and as it correspondingly reduces the value of human labor power and the value of the family to itself, it carries with it what might be called a push to mediocrity, a reduction of the lowest common denominator in the cultural sphere. Marx writes, "The intellectual desolation artificially produced by converting immature human beings into mere machines for the fabrication of surplus value." And of course, the text is provides ample evidence of this particular claim. And I'll skip those, and of course I'll remind the reader that there's plenty of information as to what Marx was writing about, this push to mediocrity in the lives of children in the mid 19th century. But I'd like to bring this up to speed here. I'd like to bring us up to speed late 20th century and the early 21st century in which we find ourselves. And that is, to what conclusions are we to arrive about the late 20th century and about the early 21st century schooling, given our contemporary push to mediocrity? the reduction of instruction to children's repetition of algorithms and sequences, mediated at a distance by a robot or a human being at the levers of a robot, right? Not for 75 students, but for well over 100, as is the case in university massive open online courses, what we were talking about last week as MOOCs, right? How do we make sense of this? You know, is it the case that if children are not in direct communication with robots, then they are in communication with those of us who are at the levers of the robots, ensuring that we transmit, those of us who are at the levers of the robot, ensuring that those young people with whom we work are readied for a mediocrity on the basis of today's standards, and a mediocrity that may very well be less, or rather more mediocre than today's mediocrity, on account of the ever-increasing push, right, towards surplus value. What do you suppose are the implications of this thinking? What do you suppose are the implications of this as far as educators are concerned? And I don't mean to say that educators are interested in cultivating mediocrity. And I certainly don't mean to say that educators are divorced from history and are acting as are impelled by the automaton themselves. It's just that, at the very least, educators are contending with this push. What is the role, or what should be the role of educators in light of our existence in a capitalist system?
Well, what should be the role of educators in a capitalist system? I mean, what lens are we asking this through? I mean, what should educators do, given the fact that they're in a capitalist system, to resist capitalism? Or are we talking about, from the capitalist perspective, what are teachers there for, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, it's very always interesting to me, because we're talking about this kind of streamlining of production that takes place within the education system in the capitalist country. And these are things you always hear about communist countries, that, you know, that they're very drab and they're very gray, and they one thing next, and everything is very standardized and very very much you know, the outcome is predetermined, and you are a ward of the state and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, if you just look at like some of the Soviet pageantry, the Soviet just posters from the times, the things that they were doing, it's a lot more interesting than the United States. At the same time, in the United States, you have the Hays Code, so you just always have like these women with like these like long cigarettes going like this, they're all glamorous and rich, and like cable like this, you know, with a suit and a little wear, and so like you know, like Cary Grant and all that kind of stuff, right? Very, very predictable, very just, you know, just very glamorous, very unattainable for the average worker in America, whereas the Soviets are producing things like, you know, like Battleship Potemkin, and, you know, innovating like innovating cinema and stuff like that. So it's very, very different. And, you know, then you have, you know, I mean, which not to say that the individual artists don't do things. I mean, you have like, you know, Orson Welles creating Citizen Kane, and then, you know, being punished the rest of his life for having done so. So that's America, right? You know what I'm saying? And so like, so that's the United States. And then so that's just one aspect of it, but that it's always interesting to think about that. Then you think about like this idea that, like, you know, American propaganda will tell you that in socialist countries, children are bred to be this, and they're bred to be that, and they're bred to be this, as though it's these horrible things, right? So these poor kids are taken out of their homes and bred to be Olympic athletes and get gold medals, right? They're bred to go, you know, do these things which people like live and dream for, right? The reality is, you show interest in doing something in a socialist system, you are pushed, and you are pushed to the forefront. You are pushed to pursue your dreams if you have an inclination and some skill. You know what I'm saying? That's why there's so many Cuban doctors. Because if you go to like a kindergarten and you ask all these kids, what do you want to be? Some of them are going to say they want to be a dinosaur, but other ones are going to say they're going to be a doctor. It's going to be a very popular answer. I want to be a doctor, right? Well, since that's kind of a natural inclination of children, that's why
Yeah.
you end up having Cuban doctors, because it's a natural inclination to want to become a doctor, and it's the natural inclination to become a doctor very young. And you have a society that's set up so that to make that possible, that's what you get. In the United States, there's barriers and barriers upon barriers upon barriers upon barriers to do certain things that will be paid well, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of what the system we live under, and it's going to produce what it's going to produce, and it is going to be much more streamlined than a socialist system. It's going to have much less human creativity than a socialist system. It's going to have much less. It's the opposite of what we're taught in this country. We're taught in this country that competition is going to spark creativity. It's actually quite the opposite. Your creative spirit is already there. You do not need to almost die in order to or be. You do not need to fear for your life in order to be creative. In fact, that's going to limit your creativity.
Yeah.
And so this system demands of people, like, I need you to be a worker. I need you to like lift that lever. I need a certain amount of people to do this, right? And we also live in a profoundly racist system. So it's going to have like certain people like, but I have dreams. Like, well, that's too bad. I need you to go pick those strawberries. So that's kind of like that's the way the society is set up. So what do teachers do in that environment? Well, what teachers should be doing in a better society would be to prepare children for the next stage of what their natural inclination might be, and that may change. They're 4 years old, they say want to do this, and at 7 they might want to do this, and at 11 they might want to do that. And in a better society, you would be able to change those decisions. In a better society, you'd be able to do whatever. At a certain age in your early days, you probably should pick something, but in order to become excellent at it, you have to really, whatever you do in life, if you want to be excellent at it, you got to start young. But who need? But then everybody needs to be excellent if they don't want to. I mean, we can live in a society where people, you know, people can be adventurous and live many lives, and be a jack of many trades, and have a very fun life and be a very fun person.
Yeah.
Excellent people tend not to be fun people. They tend to be assholes. Excellent. People like Michael Jordan or something like that, or the I don't know. What's another example? Just Tom Brady or something. All these, like star athletes. They tend to be very driven and not the best people. So we don't need everyone to be like that. We don't need everyone to be a type A personality. I don't think that'd be an enjoyable world. But I mean, for those who are, to live in a society that would elevate and allow them to achieve their goals is great. And if that's not, they want to like live many lives, we should have a society too. And so in that society, a teacher would prepare you to go upon the course that you are naturally inclined to pursue. Now, in this society, what should teachers doing? Well, teachers should be organizing for their for better wages. They should be organizing against the capital system. So they should organize for themselves as workers, and they should organize them. They should organize in the interest of the students who are subject to this tyrannical school system that's out to produce automatons. So they should organize against the abuses
Or
of
appendages of the automaton.
right, appendages of the
I'm sorry.
automaton. No, yeah, or appendages of the automaton. So the teachers should organize against this, this factorization of the education of children, and also be in line for the parents, and they should organize with other workers as well, and the teacher should organize alongside the custodians and the food preparers, and not view themselves as separate and distinct from the rest of people who may say, let's say, work at a high school, as like, well, they do that, but I teach children, I inspire the future. Or say if they work at a college, well, the people custodians, they're here and they make sure that the grounds are clean, but I live the life of the mind, and all that kind of weird ass separation. They need to stop doing that. They need to realize that they are workers and organize alongside their fellow workers.
Yeah, yeah. There's a saying in Mexican labor history, particularly Mexican educational labor history, that says that el maestro luchando también está educando. It kind of rhymes there. So it says, the teacher who is fighting is also educating. Of course, the rhyme is lost in translation. It seems to me that the educator, the teacher, who finds herself or who finds himself, and it's often herself, particularly when the students are very young or much younger, when she finds herself in a relationship with her students, she should, in keeping with the discussion that we're having now, it seems to me, of course, the educator is not here. She is not here for us to engage in discussion. It just seems to me that the logic of the discussion would allow one to conclude that as she is cultivating consciousness, and even as she's involved in labor history and labor organizing, it seems to me that cultivating a utopian consciousness, breeding, if you will, maybe I shouldn't use the word breeding, but certainly cultivating and expanding upon students' inclinations, right? The educator must find herself necessarily so in some version or some variation of a battle to make that inclination in her students a possibility. And it's going to be a battle with those who run a society and its institutions that would keep those inclinations from developing, lest they hamper and get in the way of the cultivation of surplus value, lest they create kind of detours to capitalism that would cultivate human consciousness, liberation, and imagination. So, having brought this up, I'd like to talk now about section 4. Actually, is what we're discussing now. Getting into this, getting into the factories. That's what section 4 is about. And Marx writes then that the factory, architected as it is, facilitates the generation of a surplus value, right? And what Marx is attentive to here in section 4 is the bureaucratization of production. And he says that it's a system, and to quote Marx, is a system of productive machines continuously impelled by a central power, the prime mover, as a vast automaton composed of various mechanical and intellectual organs, acting in uninterrupted concert for the production of a common object, all of them being subordinate to a self-regulating force. And here, of course, is some language to characterize the strange force of capitalism that is everywhere and somehow nowhere to be seen. That is, in the case of this section of chapter 15, Marx maps what in another chapter he calls the conductors of activity, the field of employment, and the locus standi of the laborer, where we learn in recent reading that capitalist conditions of production bear on the mind and the physiology. We learn in this chapter that it is the same regulating force of the factory, the body and the mind in the capitalist period are fused as such and must explain, and this must explain the Sisyphean compunction for accumulation about which we read in other chapters. There's a welding, there's a welding of the body to the factory. And as the factory is impelled, right, so too is the body. And of course, we've known this already because, or at least as far as Marx's theorizations and observations on it, right, we see that the body is is in a sense morphed, um, morphed by the architecture of the factory, and even morphed into the architecture of the factory. Your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I mean, we're becoming, I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, Marx was writing this all these years ago, and then today we have the advent of, like Elon Musk and talking about like this idea of like AI and people like, merging with the machine like directly. And I mean, we had, it's interesting because I don't know. I mean, like the people, the technology is already there to do so much of this, like to do so many things. I mean, I'm not like, for like a Terminator machine or something like that, but technology is there for like Google glasses, right? Where you have like a computer
Yeah.
inside the glasses. But that was a huge failure. Yeah, because people
Or
aren't prepared.
yeah, walking around with
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, people don't think about that. They think of that as an extent, like a quantitative extension of the phone. They don't think like, oh my God, I'm a cyborg now, right? I mean, it's only older people that see that. So younger people don't feel that way. But the Google Glass was a step too far. The idea to actually have a computer on your face was like a step too far, right? But then like a computer on your watch, that sounds pretty cool. Computer on your, because it's just like, I'll just like a computer on my phone, like a computer on my watch. It's a little whatever. But with what generations find today, kind of like, oh my God, following generations won't. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's not just a question of the technology; it's also a question of getting the public prepared for what this is. And so, yeah, this is going to keep marching forward. Now, is that good or bad? I mean, I don't know if that's good or bad. I know that it simply is. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like imagine the first generation way. I mean, look at Marx. I mean, so much of Marx is it's great, but a lot of it is like this. He's throwing his hands up in the air like, oh my God, the shoe cobbler, blah, 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 blah. Does anyone really care about the shoe cobbler? Does anyone really care about the shoe cobbler today? Is that a big deal? The fact that shoes are made a certain kind of way? I mean, the fact that the shoes are made at a sweatshop is terrible. But the fact that the shoe is not made by an independent producer, but the shoe is actually made from a production line, right? Now, let's say that production line was made, this is a socialist factory. It would still be made in a production line, right? So in the future, there still may be a computer on your face, right? Is that a horrible thing? Maybe. I don't know. It sounds horrible to me. But like, is literacy horrible? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We think of literacy as like this wonderful, beautiful thing, and that if a country has a low literacy rate, that if a revolution were to take place, the first thing they would do would be like raise the literacy rate, right? That'd be one of the first things, right?
Yeah.
And we think of that as a wonderful, beautiful thing. But being literate, being able to read, is not natural. It's not normal. It's not part of, it's not caveman shit. It's something that's like we've had over a while, right? So maybe having a computer on your face is like literacy. Hundreds of years from now, we'll talk about like, hey man, like that country only has like 30% of people, like only 30% of people in that country have, like computers on their face. Like be grateful you live here. Some bullshit like that, right? Well, people talk about Wi-Fi connections like it's a human right.
Yeah.
That's happened. That's happening. That's becoming a thing, right? And I'm not saying it is or isn't. I'm not weighing in one way or the other. People talk about literacy like it's human right, like being able to read like it's human right, and preparing people to know how to read as though that's a human right, as though that is as precious as water, as precious as food, as precious as shelter. That's how people talk about literacy. That's how people are beginning to talk about internet connectivity and the digital divide. And I'm not so sure that people won't be talking that same kind of way about having a computer on your face in like 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and it's abnormal to me. It's probably more abnormal to you. And it's more abnormal still to my mother, but I think that, like gradually, it'll become more normal. The idea of just having a computer in your face is going to be like part of that. So becoming an extension or becoming connected to the machine, that's the thing. The question for us as like a question for Marxists is who owns the machine, not the nature of the machine.
Yeah. There's a reading that I did some time ago. I forget which ancient Greek philosopher I was reading about. It might have been Aristotle. I don't remember. In any case, he was lamenting, of all things, literacy. He was lamenting the written word because he saw it as a march towards stupidity. And of course, you know, his critique is in keeping with the kind of discussion we're having at the moment, because of course, in his time, right, a Marx or whatever philosopher I happen to be remembering at the moment, and maybe somebody out there knows who it is I'm talking about. In his time, of course, people memorized things. People memorized mythology. People memorized, in his time and place, people memorized mythology, and this was, of course, part and parcel of culture and the development of society. And his lament was that by way of making use of this particular technology, right, that capacity was going to be lost. People weren't going to be concerned to learn and to memorize, because of course they could commit their memory to paper or to whatever medium, right, the written word, on whatever medium the written word was transcribed. I want to get back to the reading here, and at some point down the road, I've got to find out who Dr. Ur is. Dr. Ur is, he must be a physician about whom Marx was writing in chapter 15. He says, Dr. Ur, the Pindar of the automatic factory, describes it, on the one hand, as combined cooperation of many orders of work people, adult and young, intending with assiduous skill a system of productive machines, continuously impelled by a central power, the prime mover, on the other hand, as a vast automaton composed of various mechanical and intellectual organs. Of course, I've read this already. I want to get to this next section in just a bit. Acting in uninterrupted concert for the production of a common object, all of them being subordinate to a self-regulating driving force. These two, and this is a quote, these two descriptions are far from being identical. In one, the collective labor or social body of labor appears as the dominant subject, and the mechanical automaton as the object. In the other, the automaton itself is the subject, and the workmen are merely conscious organs coordinate with the unconscious organs of the automaton, and together with them subordinated to the central moving power. In other words, in one case, right, the machinery is our object, and in another case, we are the object of the machinery. The strange irony is that the machinery is an automaton, as far as is an automaton, and is an impaler of production, is an impaler of capitalist production, is an impaler of commodities, is an impaler of surplus value. There's something else that I noted here that I'd like to share then, right? That introduced here is a standardization and autocratic capacity of the automaton, such that the automaton, as Marx says, itself is the subject and the workers are the object, as I conclude. The greater the mechanization of production, the greater it seems will be the standardization of humanity, as their task is not to introduce particular techniques. These have been usurped by technology, after all. But to man, and I say that in quotes, but to man the machinery of the factory, if, as Marx asserts then, machinery transforms the workman from his very childhood into a part of a detail machine, then, if this is the case, what are the implications for colonized educators who work with colonized students in contexts where the only ones who are attentive to the corresponding relationship between the classroom and the economy are those who Bill Watkins called the white architects of Black education? In other words, if the workman should be taught from childhood in order that he may learn to adapt his own movements to the uniform and unceasing motion of the automaton, and if it exhausts the nervous system to the uttermost and confiscates every atom of freedom, both in bodily and intellectual activity, what are the implications for colonized workers who are educators who grade colonized workers who are students? I'm thinking about, in this particular moment, I'm thinking about something that I was expected to do and that I never did, to my detriment as a worker at a school called Fauché Learning Center, of all places. About 22 years ago, I was a junior high teacher there. And when we were out on yard duty, you know, yard duty, you know, I mean, even the term is really illustrative here. We were on yard duty, patrolling the students. The bell rings, and the students who were uniformed at this particular public school with khakis, khaki pants. The boys were with khaki pants and brown colored shirts, as I remember. The bell rang, and they were to drop to their knees, hear a whistle from one of the yard duty teachers, and then form a line, put their hands behind their back, and in single file march to class and stop before they entered the classroom, and silently, again with their hands behind their back, walk into the classroom as the teacher watched them go in. As a teacher watched them go in. And I'm thinking about two things here in this particular scenario. The first one, of course, is this theoretical stuff that I'm reading about here in chapter 15, where as Marx helps to conclude, right, that the workman should be taught from childhood in order that he may learn to adapt his own movements to the uniform and unceasing motion of the automaton. That's the first thing that I think about. But in less theoretical terms, and certainly in more practical terms, there is a clear relationship that the production of this commodity called tomorrow's 7th graders or called tomorrow's 8th graders are going to be, as next year's 8th graders, en route to whatever it is that is being produced in the society and in the region in which they live. In the region in which they live, it seems to me, one that no longer produces chairs or cars or tires or car batteries, one that disproportionately produces prisoners. It seems that our task was to correspond the body of the commodity to the commodity that he will be in the future. And it makes me think then about the less theoretical and certainly very practical observation that our task as workers, colonized educators, working with workers that we call students, is as part of a system that produces a factory system that produces prisoners, the school to prison pipeline. Your thoughts?
Well, that's a lot to think about. So I mean, so wait, they actually had their hands behind their backs, and they were
Yeah.
like
In uniform, their hands behind their back. Once they had arisen from their knees under the supervision and authority of the yard duty supervisor, they marched in silence before they were let into, and they were put at the door of the box from which they can't escape while they are there. They are put at the door of the box, and we'll call it the classroom. And there they must walk in disciplined and silent fashion to be supervised and controlled within this particular architecture. I'm sorry. So your thoughts as far as these observations, these questions, and this reality. I mean, is it simple theorization? Is it abstract theorization on the part of Marx? You know, in the mid-19th century, or is it damning language to understand and make sense of contemporary, you know, late 20th century and early 21st century education of Black boys, Chicana and Chicano children, Black girls, you know, Latina and Latino children more generally? You know, what is the utility here, and what is the utility of this book for those of us who are colonized people and who work as educators? You know.
Well, I mean, I think so the fact of the matter is that like capital in general is going to do that. It's going to create roles for people, right? And so it's going to create a division of labor. I mean, there's a division of labor that is not necessarily tied to capital. It's just tied to you know, like to the productive demands, right? To the demands of production. So the division of labor, that kind of that, and then there's aspects of the division of labor that are directly tied to the necessity of doing under like commodity. So yeah, there are aspects of it but generally speaking, in order to get something produced, it's not necessarily tied to capital. It's tied to the rhythms of the industry, right? But within that, within the division of labor, which is huge, right? There are positions that are prized. There are prized positions, and there are undesired positions. Positions you wouldn't want to have, and because of, you know, the history of colonialism, because the history of conquest, and the history of brutality and murder, those undesirable positions go to the conquered peoples, and so that's kind of what we have here in the United States of America. So you look at the meat packing industry. Well, who's doing that, right? Then you look at, like, you know, jobs like for like high-end lawyers and high-end, like, you know, tech workers. Well, who's doing that? And you'll see you know, you'll see the very clear distinctions that exist in American society when you look at who's doing what work. And so that's where I think how what we're looking at applies to that, but to the sheer brutality of what's going on in America today, with the caging of children, with the abuses that we see. It's a really horrible system. It's a really horrible system, but it's also horrible. And when you look at, like, it's not enough to say it's horrible. I mean, when you actually examine what it does to the people who experience it, it turns them into their own. It turns them into their own wardens. You know, I mean, it turns them into their own prison guards, right? So I can just imagine these children being, you know, told to go to their knees, and I can imagine someone rebelling against that, and I can imagine him disciplined by his own classmates.
Oh, it happens. It happens.
Yeah. So like, you know, fuck this. I'm not going to go to my knees. This is bullshit. You're not going to treat me like a prisoner. And like, shut up, man. Shut the fuck up. You know, I'm going to get your ass later. You know, like that kind of thing, right? Just do it. You know, like that.
All of us.
Right. They're going to punish everyone, right? And so like, and that's what the system does to you. But that's really a great microcosm for the way the capital system works as a whole, where you can actually get the workers to discipline themselves. Um,
Yeah.
because to rebel, if you rebel, it's going to have negative consequences for everyone. So don't rebel. Don't speak up. Keep your head down. Keep doing it. Like you're gonna make things worse for everyone, right? So this concept that you're gonna make things worse is what kind of like hovers over everyone's head all the time.
It's a microcosm of what happened in El Mozote, for instance, or what happened in my life. Uh, it's a microcosm of punishing a whole lot of people, right, for the aspirations and the humanity and the pursuit of um, humanity by a few, right? And so it cultivates subservience because, of course, the hand of power is um, is is brought upon not just those who are quote unquote guilty of being human beings, right? But it's brought upon the brothers and sisters and relatives and friends and neighbors and so on um, of those human beings, right? It deadens imagination, it breeds conformity, and it channels people to subservience. I'd like to um, uh, uh, bring our discussion to closure by way of a quote here. But before I get into the quote, I'd like to say that one of the main conclusions of this week's reading, again, is that um, culture is secondary to material conditions. Within the capitalist mode that has surplus value generation as its aim, machinery cheapens production costs by converting the variable costs to constant ones. It standardizes labor such that technique is replaced by machinery. All humanity then is an appendage of machinery. It deadens imagination and intellect and is used to protect against labor agitation. And the quote is, on the automatic plan, skilled labor gets progressively superseded. The effect of improvements in machinery, not merely in superseding the necessity for the employment of the same quantity of adult labor as before in order to produce a given result, but in substituting one description of human labor for another, the less skilled for the more skilled, the juvenile for the adult, the female for the male, causes a fresh disturbance in the rate of wages. The effect of substituting the self-acting mule for the common mule, I wonder what Marx was implying there, is to
Yeah.
discharge the greater part of the men spinners, and to retain adolescents and children. And then finally, but machinery not only acts as a competitor who gets the better of the workman and is constantly on the point of making him superfluous, it is also a power inimical to him, and as such capital proclaims it from the rooftops, and as such makes use of it. It is the most powerful weapon for repressing strikes, those periodical revolts of the working class against the autocracy of capital. It seems to me that I read some of this stuff already. Maybe I'm repeating my notes, Matt.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that. Yeah. I mean, we've kind of gone over it a few times now, but
Yeah,
repeating it over and over, it bears repeating. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you are trained to be an extension of the machine, and not only, and again, like so how to view this from not a luddite position would be that it's not a question of your interaction with machinery that's the issue. I mean, this may be kind of one of the failures of Marxism, actually, though. I mean, like, because there is something inherent to the machinery that needs to stop happening. I mean, like, there is something inherent to like some of the machinery. I mean, not all of it, but some of it, much of it, right? The fact that it's so much was driven by like petroleum, for instance. The fact that we're drilling the ocean. The fact that like some of it's like it's dangerous to go down to coal mines, like all this like that. Those aspects of those aspects of the Industrial Revolution are destroying the planet and destroying human lungs of the workers who participate in it, right? So there's some aspects of this technology, the progress of technology that is actually destroying life on Earth, and that aspect of it, whether or not it was communally owned by the proletariat, would still be destroying the Earth, right? You know what I mean? Like like Chernobyl or something like that. So whether or not you have a social system, there's certain aspects of there's certain exercises, industrial exercises that destroy the Earth regardless. And so that would have to be done away with, right? But that's not really covered here. So um, when we're talking about these other technologies that are more in tune with like not destroying the Earth, and in the advance of those, the problem isn't so much electronics. The problem isn't so much like the machines. The problem isn't so much that we're losing our humanity. I mean, some people would argue, like in earlier periods of time, that learning how to read was losing our humanity.
Yeah.
Now, knowing how to read as what makes you human, right? I mean, you know what I'm saying? So, like Marx writes about like the everyone going into the factory and being dehumanized by going to the factory. By the 1950s, going to the factory alongside your union brothers, pair of overalls, fighting for, I don't know, punching somebody out by Jimmy Hoffa. That became like that's what made you a man, right? So like that, like going into the factory and doing these things, right? So this thing that Marx said like reduced you to a mule, by the 1950s and 60s was like that was the great thing, to go to a factory and work in the factory and be a factory worker, and that's how you proved your worth, you proved your salt by doing the job of your father. Factory work disappears, like, oh my God, this is gone, this is leaving, this is going away somewhere else. And then and then people get adjusted to that. So it's like people adjust to what's in front of them, and they look at what's in front of them as the way of things. And I don't think Marx is an exception to that. I think Marx actually looked at the world that was being lost and thought of that world with a great sentimental value. And so there was something inherent to that. So today, when we talk about teachers, there's this inherent idea about a teacher in front of a piece of chalk with, all I need is a chalkboard and a piece of chalk, and I can, blah, blah, blah. And all these different technologies are coming in, but they don't have the fundamentals. They don't have the true thing. They don't have that universal from time immemorial of a piece of chalk and a chalkboard. Well, I could look it up right now. Right. Yeah. I could look up right now and find out when chalkboards were invented. Right. I guarantee you it's not more than like 200, 300 years ago. Right. I can guarantee you that right now. That is, the chalkboard is not that old, right? And so like there's nothing time immemorial about a piece of chalk and a chalkboard, right? And so that kind of which means that the chalk and chalkboard can go the way of other things that we once had are now gone. So there's nothing inherent worth protecting in the way that we just have done things, because there's a magical quality to them, or there's something so innately human about them. Of course, it's innately human. Human beings did it, and of course, there's like a tradition, something that like you feel sentimental about. Of course, you do things I feel sentimental about, but it doesn't mean that these advanced technologies in and of themselves are bad. What they are in and of themselves, in a world wherein you must sing for your supper, is a threat to your life, to your ability to live, right? And that must be fought. But in order to fight that, you have to change the economic system. It's not like you have to destroy the machines.
Yeah. Well, we're at the end, and it seems to me appropriate for me to request a poem, and not that I think this is the first time I do it as we. Okay. Yeah. It's just that there's a poem about there is no democracy in the way of things.
Okay.
And I'd like you to share it, please.
The whole thing, or just the beginning, the first part?
Whatever you see, whatever you think is relevant here.
All right. So I'll do Precarious Rex Act 1, because the whole thing goes on to great absurdity, and it's like probably between like 12 minutes to read the whole thing, but like it's very long. But the beginning, I think really talks about some of the stuff we've been talking about here. Okay. So this is
All right.
Precarious Rex, Act 1. There's no democracy in the way of things. There is no democracy in the way of things. There is no democracy in the way of things, and torture the hands moved by the engine of a clock. The world as it is, whether you like it or not. For all the world's a cage, and we men and women merely its prisoners. And one man in his time can do many bids, and his time begins. Name and birth certificate with a measure of infant, with the doctor's swift hand, that first scene of public humiliation, the very first act. Welcome to the world, baby. You ain't seen nothing yet. Then on to schoolyard and lunchbox, and off to factory feed and process. Bright face, clean teeth, amongst others, new to the fact that there is no democracy in the way of things. Then on to fighter, then lover, soldier, company man, true believer, full of strange and tragic oaths to a world of jealous competition, and how in his time he shall live. From now in the fact that one day he shall die. Oh, how he shall dream. And oh, how he shall strive. Then on to eyes wise with familiarity. The light cancer grows, his imagination begins to bend with the spine. His last years, dead man walking, voice trembling, silence encroaching, eyes fading, failure coming into view as time served ends this strange, eventful history just as it began. Ashes to ashes. Dust to dust, oblivion to oblivion, imprisoned, leaving nothing behind him but measurements to be weighed and documented by doctor's certificate.
Dust to dust, doctor to doctor, it seems to. Doctored and doctored, yeah. Wow. Thank you, Mark. Why do I keep on calling you Mark? I'm sorry, Matt. I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it very much. All right. We'll talk again.
So I'm sure you can answer some of these people.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. I see people's names now on my screen. So San and Martin, I'll certainly be sending responses as I typically do to people. It's just that, I've got class in about 10-15 minutes, so